I was 300 feet above the Gulf of Mexico, tightening a pressure valve in the scorching sun, when my phone buzzed in my chest pocket. The message was short. "I'm done. The divorce is filed. Don't come home." That was it. No explanation. No warning. 13 years together raised in a text. I stared at the screen for a full minute, the wind howling around the steel frame beneath my boots. My name is Robert Mitchell. I'm 38 years old, and I work 6-week shifts on an offshore oil rig out of Houston, Texas. Which means I was 3 weeks into a deployment, hundreds of miles from the nearest shoreline, with no way to go back, no way to fix anything, no way to even scream. When I checked our savings account during the next break, my heart dropped. $0. The $45,000 we'd been saving for our first home, gone, emptied, like the space where my marriage used to be. I didn't cry. I didn't call her. I didn't even get angry. Because what Samantha didn't know was that I'd already seen the signs, and I'd been preparing quietly, methodically for months. She thought she ended things on her terms. But you're about to hear the real story. Have you ever been betrayed when you were just trying to build a future for someone else? Let me know where you're watching from, and if you've ever seen betrayal coming before it hit. Because what happened next, she never saw coming. My name is Robert Mitchell. I'm 38 years old, and for the last 14 years, I've worked rotations on offshore rigs across the Gulf of Mexico, 6 weeks on, 6 weeks off. It's tough work, the kind that leaves you sore in places you didn't even know existed, but it pays well if you can handle the grind. And I could. I always could. I met Samantha in Galveston, back when I was still doing my first year of shifts. She worked front desk at a dental clinic near the docks, sharp wit, green eyes, and a smile that made me forget how exhausted I was after 12-hour days. She liked that I was steady, grounded. She used to say I had an anchor soul. We got married after 2 years. Nothing fancy. Just a small ceremony by the pier with her mom crying and me sweating through a rental suit. We made it work, me being gone for weeks at a time, her running our life on shore. Every time I came home, she'd make carne asada and tell me the neighbor gossip like I never left. We weren't rich, but we had a plan. Save up for a down payment, get out of that one-bedroom rental, start a family once we bought a place of our own. We even had a spreadsheet on the fridge with house fund printed in bold marker. Every extra shift I picked up, every holiday I spent offshore was all for that number to grow. By last year, it hit 45-0. We were close. So close. But somewhere along the way, something changed in her. I noticed it first in the way her voice shifted on the phone. Less warmth, more distracted. She stopped asking when I'd be home, stopped texting me little updates during the day. She said it was just stress at work, that the new office manager was a nightmare, that she was tired, and I believed her. Or maybe I just wanted to. I started noticing the small things. New clothes I hadn't seen before, a gym membership she never used. Random charges on our joint card from places I'd never heard of, some boutique furniture shop, a weekend Airbnb up near Austin for a girls' trip. It didn't add up, but I didn't confront her. I didn't accuse. I didn't yell. I just started paying attention, quietly. There was one guy I couldn't shake off my mind, Jared. The neighbor who lived 2 houses down, the kind who always found a reason to help when I wasn't around. Fixing her taillight, carrying in groceries, trimming the hedge between our yards, even though it clearly grew from his side. She said I was imagining it, said Jared was just being neighborly. But I know how men look at another man's wife when they don't respect the ring. I know the way his eyes followed her across the driveway. I saw it. So I started moving some things into my personal account. Not much, just my overtime pay. I saved receipts, noted timestamps, kept a journal. Not because I didn't trust her, but because something inside me whispered, she's not who you think she is anymore. Still, even with all that, I didn't expect that text. I didn't expect her to blindside me while I was hanging off a scaffold, soaked in sweat and crude, hundreds of miles from shore. I didn't expect her to wipe out everything we'd worked for. But that's the thing about people like Samantha, they mistake quiet men for weak ones. They think that because we don't scream or slam doors, we're not dangerous. She was wrong. I may have been stuck on a rig, but my mind was already moving, mapping out the pieces, calculating the next steps. Because Samantha may have taken the first swing, but I wasn't finished yet. And the next move was mine. The thing about working offshore is, you get real good at compartmentalizing. You learn to keep your head straight when alarms are blaring and the deck is slick with oil. You handle pressure literal and emotional like a second skin. So, after Samantha's text and the shock of seeing our savings drained, I did what I always do. I went back to work. Tightened bolts. Monitored flow lines. Logged equipment performance like nothing happened. But something had happened, and it wasn't over. That night, I used my 20-minute break in the comms trailer to log into our shared bank account. The records told a quiet story, one Samantha never thought I'd be reading. Withdrawals every week since I left. Small at first, then bolder, bigger. The last one? 45 grand. Gone, in a single transfer. Straight into an account under her maiden name. I dug deeper. She'd updated her mailing address with the bank, rerouted statements to her sister's place in Austin. The level of planning was meticulous and cold. She hadn't just decided to leave. She'd been building an escape. And the part that hit hardest? She waited until I was stuck, literally stranded on a metal platform, miles from shore with no way to fight back. But she forgot something. You can't corner someone who's already used to working under pressure. She didn't know that 2 months earlier, I'd spoken with a lawyer, a buddy of mine, Linda Navarro, whose firm handled oil field accident claims. I asked her casual questions back then about joint assets, about forged signatures, about account tampering. At the time, Linda had raised an eyebrow and asked, "Everything okay at home?" I'd said yes, but I knew better. Now, I sent her an email. Just 5 words. "You were right. Let's talk." 3 days later, I stepped off the chopper back on shore. No welcoming hug, no messages. Just the empty Texas sky and a dull weight in my chest. I didn't go home. Instead, I booked a 2-night stay in a motel off Highway 146. Clean enough, cheap, untraceable. I turned my phone off and opened my laptop. I logged into the Nest camera I'd installed on our front porch last year. She never changed the password. The feed flickered. There she was. Samantha, barefoot, laughing, and there he was. Jared, shirtless, carrying a 6-pack, walking like he owned the place. My place. He used the side gate I built with my own hands, took a drink from my glass in the kitchen, sat on my damn couch like it was his. Samantha wore my t-shirt, the one I left folded in the hallway closet before this last deployment. They didn't look like they were grieving a marriage. They looked like a couple who'd been playing house for months. That's when something inside me turned. Not rage, not pain. Something colder. Something surgical. You want to cheat? Fine. You want to rob me? All right. But you do not get to take my silence as surrender. I called Linda. We scheduled a meeting. Then I checked something else through her property title. And that's when I realized Samantha made one very big mistake. The house? Still under both our names. She hadn't touched the deed. Probably assumed I wouldn't notice. Probably thought I'd be too heartbroken, too far away, too stupid to check. She was wrong. Because if Samantha thought this was just about a broken heart, she was about to learn what it's like when a man with nothing left starts playing the long game. The next morning, I sat across from Linda in her office, quiet, climate-controlled, framed certificates lining the walls. She didn't waste time. "She forged your name on the account change," Linda said after skimming the documents I downloaded from our bank. "That alone is financial fraud." "She moved 45 grand and filed for divorce by text," I added flatly. Linda nodded, "which makes this premeditated asset stripping. Texas courts don't take kindly to that, especially when the other party's working offshore without access." She paused, leaning back in her chair. "Robert, do you want revenge or do you want justice?" I looked her dead in the eye. "Both, in that order." That's when Linda leaned in and gave me the first piece of real clarity I'd had in weeks. She thinks she's in control right now. She's wrong. We started building the case. Every withdrawal, every email, every document I'd quietly saved. We ordered a title check on the house. Sure enough, she hadn't even tried to refinance. Probably too busy playing house with Jared to think about the details. But here's the thing about offshore workers, we don't overlook details. I spent 12 years keeping track of pipe pressure and blowout preventers. You don't survive that long by being careless. And now, I was bringing that same precision to the destruction of my ex-wife's fantasy life. First, I moved quickly to freeze our joint accounts. Linda filed an emergency financial restraining order, which would stop Samantha from selling or transferring any property under both names. Then I made a quiet call to my buddy Ray, realtor, ex-Marine, no time for nonsense. Ray, how fast can you move a property if the other owner doesn't know it's being listed? He laughed. You trying to get even, Mitch? Let's just say I'm ready to downsize. Within 48 hours, we had the paperwork in motion, a private buyer lined up, a fast-track closing window, all perfectly legal. The house hadn't been declared as contested yet, and Texas law gave me just enough leeway to act while the divorce was pending. Samantha wouldn't know until the paperwork landed in her mailbox. And speaking of mailboxes, I had one more surprise. I went to the house. Not to confront, not to yell, just to see. They weren't home. Jared's truck was gone. Samantha's car, too. I used the spare key taped behind the gas meter, the one she forgot I showed her 6 years ago when we first moved in. The place looked different. Candles I'd never seen. A new throw blanket. A different coffee maker. Like she'd already started redecorating her life. I walked to the safe behind the laundry shelf still, exactly where I left it. Inside, my passport, my offshore contracts, my backup flash drive with every expense, every paycheck, every signed record of the money I had earned and deposited into that house. I took what was mine, and then I left one thing behind. A printed copy of the real estate listing on the kitchen counter, with one note written in red Sharpie. You forgot whose name is still on the deed. The moment I walked out, I knew something had changed. There was no turning back now. She'd made her move. But now, it was my turn. And this wasn't just about money anymore. This was about principle. This was about showing Samantha and Jared that you don't get to build your future on someone else's back and expect them to stay down. It didn't take long for the chaos to begin. 2 days after I left the listing on the kitchen counter, I got a text from Samantha. No greeting, no explanation, just 4 words. What the hell, Robert? I didn't reply. Instead, I forwarded the message to Linda. She laughed on the phone. That means she just got the listing notice. You got her attention. Then came the calls. Blocked number. Blocked again. Then a message from Jared. Real mature, man. We can settle this like adults. Settle? They had taken everything. My trust, my savings, my home. And now they wanted to talk about fairness? No, they didn't want fair. They wanted control back. But I'd already cut the strings. Legally, the house was halfway mine. So was the equity. Samantha couldn't stop the sale without contesting the deed, which would open up a full audit of our financial history in court. And Linda? She was ready for that. She filed a motion demanding Samantha disclose all her financial accounts, including the one under her maiden name. The court granted it. Samantha had 7 days to respond. That's when things got messy. I checked the security cameras again. This time, they were arguing. No more laughing. No more stolen glances. Just Jared waving his arms, Samantha pacing with a phone in her hand. They knew the walls were closing in. You see, people like Jared, they're great in fantasy. Great when they're sneaking around, borrowing your life like it's a spare jacket. But when the pressure turns real, they fold. By day 5, Jared was gone. His truck never showed back up. On day 6, Samantha left 3 voicemails. The last one cracked me open a little, not with sympathy, but with clarity. I don't know what happened to you, Robert. You used to be kind. You used to be stable. Now you're acting like someone I don't even recognize. I played it twice, then hit delete. Because she was right. I wasn't the same man she left. That man died the minute I opened that bank app on the rig and saw my future stolen. This version of me, he doesn't beg. He plans. And the plan wasn't finished yet. I sent Linda the footage I'd saved from the Nescamov Jared using my mug, sitting on my couch, walking barefoot around my living room with Samantha curled up next to him. It wasn't to make her jealous. It was to show intent. Intent to occupy marital property. Intent to commit cohabitation fraud in the middle of divorce proceedings. That footage, that tipped everything in my favor. It proved this wasn't a mutual breakup. It was a betrayal. A calculated one. We filed an amendment to our court petition, requested an expedited hearing, presented the judge with everything: bank records, title documents, the video logs, even timestamps of when Samantha started withdrawing funds. The judge's face barely moved. But when he looked up, he said one thing. "Mrs. Mitchell, it appears you've been planning this for quite some time," she stammered. Claimed she was afraid to confront me, that she didn't know how to leave, that Jared had nothing to do with anything. The judge wasn't buying it. He ordered a full freeze on all community assets pending investigation and granted me full rights to proceed with the sale of the home under emergency relief. The next morning, I signed the closing papers. By the end of the week, I had a $142,000 check in my hand-me half of the equity, cleared and legally mine. I walked into the same bank Samantha had drained weeks earlier and deposited it into a brand new account. Under my name, no cosigner, no shared access, no more illusions. The silence that followed was beautiful. No more texts. No more voicemails. Just a hollow echo from the woman who once said she'd never leave me floating in the dark. But I wasn't floating anymore. I was anchored. Right where I chose to be. And she? She was left to explain to her friends and family how the man she thought would crumble sold the house from underneath her without raising his voice. A week after the sale closed, Samantha showed up at my new apartment. I knew she would. She still had access to old documents. She probably found the forwarding address on some residual mail. I didn't answer the door. I watched from the window as she stood there in jeans and a hoodie, not her usual designer outfits, holding something in her hand, maybe the listing paper, maybe a letter. She knocked once, twice, then said my name. "Robert, please." I still didn't open the door, because this wasn't a conversation anymore. It was a consequence. Later that night, she sent a final text. I hope it was worth it. I read it once and locked my phone. It was worth it. But not in the way she meant. Not because I got the house money. Not even because I embarrassed her. It was worth it. Because I got myself back. See, when you give your life to someone, your money, your time, your trust, you don't do it expecting betrayal. You do it because you believe in building something together. But Samantha had never been building. She'd been withdrawing slowly, steadily, until I was just a shell of the man I used to be. But now I was rebuilding, without her. And Jared? He wasn't handling things well. A mutual friend told me he'd lost his job. Apparently, he'd been fired from the mechanic shop for inappropriate use of customer property. Rumor had it he'd taken one of the client cars out for a joyride. Got caught, lost everything. When it rains, it pours. A few days after that, I got a letter from Samantha's lawyer. She was contesting the financial division of assets. Claimed I misled the court, said I withheld property, and wanted to reopen the case. Linda and I met it head on. We responded with the full audit trail, her withdrawals, her secret accounts, the nest footage, the cohabitation evidence. And the best part? We added my inheritance. Samantha didn't know that 6 months before she filed for divorce, I'd inherited $210,000 from my grandfather. It was in a separate account under my name, untouched, premarital and explicitly exempt. She thought she left me broke. She didn't know I had more money than ever. She just didn't get a single cent of it. When the judge reviewed everything, he didn't even schedule a new hearing. Petition denied. Division remains final. Plaintiff bears responsibility for legal fees. She tried to play the long game. But I had the patience of a man who works 6 weeks offshore without seeing land. I could wait forever. And now I had time. And peace. I used part of the money to buy a small cabin out near Lake Livingston. 2 bedrooms, wraparound porch, quiet, trees in every direction. I go there between shifts now. Fish in the mornings, read in the afternoons. No chaos, no arguments, just stillness. Sometimes I think back to that moment on the rig when the text came in. The second my whole life cracked wide open. At the time, it felt like the beginning of the end. Now I know better. It was the end of her story. But it was the beginning of mine. Because this wasn't just about divorce. This was about remembering who I am. A man who builds, who endures, who plans. A man who doesn't burn bridges. He just waits for the tide to rise and walks across the wreckage when it's safe. 6 months later, I stood on the dock behind my cabin, watching the sunrise spill gold over Lake Livingston. The water was still, like glass. My coffee was hot. The air, clean. And for the first time in a long while, my chest didn't feel heavy. I hadn't just survived what Samantha did. I'd reclaimed everything she tried to take from me. She filed for divorce thinking I'd fall apart, that I'd beg, crawl, collapse. Instead, I stayed calm, focused. I let her dig her own grave while I built my next foundation. I never raised my voice. Never threw a single punch. But make no mistake, this was a war. And I won. Jared was long gone. Samantha, last I heard, moved in with a friend across town. No job, no partner, no house, just an apartment and a mountain of legal bills she still hadn't paid off. She thought I'd be the one left with nothing. Instead, I ended up with a lakeside home, a clean bank account, and the kind of peace no one can buy. The kind you earn. There are 2 kinds of men in this world. The ones who panic when the storm hits, and the ones who become the storm. I didn't lash out. I didn't threaten. I outlasted. And in the end, she had to live with something far worse than revenge. She had to live with knowing that I was better without her. That I didn't just move on, I moved up. What did you think of this story? If you were in Robert's boots, would you have handled it the same way? Let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe to Revenge with Max for powerful news stories every day. Drop a 15 if you stand with Robert. And share this with someone who needs to hear. Sometimes silence isn't surrender, it's strategy.